Good morning, everybody. Hopefully everyone can hear me now, and we'll make a start. I think we've still got some more participants to join us. Hopefully people will join as they manage to get into the meeting. So welcome everyone to the reopening briefing, Getting to Grips with the Guidance session, hosted by museum development teams across the North. There are currently about 68 participants in the call, and like I said, we're expecting some more to join us, and hopefully they'll be able to get in soon. Today we're joined by Emma Chaplin, Director of AIM, who's going to be doing a presentation on the sector guidance from NMDC and also talk about the AIM and MDN checklist that accompanies that too. The session's hosted by myself. I'm Kay Hardiman from Museum Development Northwest, and also by Joe Bartholomew from Museum Development Yorkshire and Ian Bapty from Museum Development Northeast. We have other MD staff behind the scenes that are assisting with the tech and also will help to answer some questions in the chat by sharing links and resources. We're also joined by Joanne from Stage Text, who's in the background, and she's providing live subtitles for you. So if you'd like to see the captions, if you look at the bottom of your screen, there's a control bar there, and there should be a closed caption tab that you can click. And then you can, if you press the little arrow on the right-hand side of that, you can view the subtitles there or hide the subtitles as you require. You're all muted and your cameras are switched off, and please remain this way throughout the session. To improve your experience of the session, there's a few things that you can do. So again, on the bottom of your screen, on the control panel, you'll find the chat function. So it's a little pop-up box with chat underneath. If you click on that, you should have on the right-hand side a chat function box. And in there, you can type all your questions or comments. So you type in your message, press return, and then everyone should be able to see what you put in chat. So use this throughout the session to post your questions and comments, but also share any experiences that you might have or top tips around reopening, because we know you've all been working hard on developing your strategies for reopening. If you can keep your comments and questions concise and as clear as possible, that would be really useful, because MD will be reviewing those and reading out the questions and comments later on in the Q&A session. Because there's so many of us on this call, you might find it better to switch your viewing option to speaker view. So if you go to the top right-hand side of your screen, you should see some little blobs. And if you hover over that, you should have the option to turn it to speaker view, which means just the people that have got the cameras switched on should pop up for you. A few other things to say. The session is being recorded, but obviously none of you will appear in it because your videos are switched off. And this is going to be edited before being made available online, and also the subtitles will be on there as well. This is so we can share it more widely with the sector through the Museum Development Network and also through AIM. But as things change quite quickly, the recording may only be available for a limited time if the guidance changes significantly going forward. We'll also record the transcript of the chat text, which will help Museum Development to respond to any unanswered questions once the session's finished, and we can probably get back to you by email on some of those. So I'll now hand over to Joe Bartholomew from Museum Development Yorkshire, who's going to give a bit more detail about the schedule for the day, provide some information about what's coming up from MD, and also introduce our speaker for today.
Thanks, Kay. So in a short while, we'll be handing over to Emma, and Emma's going to share a presentation with us for about 30 minutes. After Emma's presentation, we're just going to take a short comfort break of about 5 minutes, give you a chance to refresh your cups of tea and stretch your legs, and give us a chance to just process the questions. And then we'll go into our Q&A session, which will be until 12:30. And your MD contacts will be fielding questions through to Emma and supporting her in answering those for you. Just to say, of course, as Kay has said, do make active use of the chat during this whole time, because that's the way that we can get your feedback. So please enter your questions into the chat, and then we'll pick up especially on those big questions that are most relevant to everyone. The challenge today, of course, is we're not going to be able to answer very specific questions about individual venues, but we will come back to people where we can help with those things directly afterwards. The other thing to note is that we are going to be running some additional sessions in the coming weeks to support you in this area of work. And that there'll be specific dates and so on coming out through the usual channels in each region. But just so that everyone is aware, the topics that we're going to be covering will be family-friendly approaches. So that's going to be a session in each region working with kids in museums. We're also going to be looking at disability access within the COVID secure guidelines with Disability Collaborative Network, and that will be a webinar more in this format going across the whole of MD North. And we're also going to be looking at sessions in region around collections and ensuring ongoing care of collections in an environment of enhanced cleaning and so on. So that's what we have lined up already, and I'm sure there'll be other opportunities coming through too. So do please keep an eye on the comms from your MD region, and we'll keep you informed. And just to keep those topics in mind when it comes to your questions, there are going to be additional opportunities for deeper discussion on these special areas as well. Okay, so thanks very much for your patience during the introductions this morning. I'd now like to hand over to Emma, who's going to share with us her insights based on her work in the last few weeks. Thanks, Emma.
Thank you. I'm just going to share my screen. Okie doke. I'm hoping that everyone can see my slides, and you can also see me just as a small head next to it. Anyway, hello everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me to take part in this today, Kay and Lindsay and Joe and Ian. It's a real pleasure to see so many familiar names and so many familiar museums in the participants list. So it's not as good as seeing you in person, but it's nice to know we're all in the same sort of virtual space. So yes, I'm Emma Chaplin. I'm the director of AIM, the Association of Independent Museums. And we've been quite heavily involved in reopening guidance. I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. But by way of scene setting, as you all know, museums in England can open from the 4th of July. And can is the important word in all this, because as you all know, but I'm not sure that the public are so clear on this, you don't have to open on the 4th of July. It is up to each museum to make their own decision on what's the best for them and what's the best for your staff and your visitors to operate safely and viably. So, and I'm also well aware that the decision making for a lot of museums isn't necessarily in your hands. If you have a parent organisation, a local authority, a university, or just you have particular local circumstances, maybe, I don't know, around public transport availability, that will also affect your decision on whether and how you can reopen safely. Before I start, it's lovely to be asked to sort of answer questions. And say I've been fortunate that I've been quite heavily involved in the guidelines on this. And with my role, I'm in a fortunate position. I get to talk to a lot of different museums across the country. So I do have a reasonable overview of what's going on and best practice. But this is difficult stuff. There is not a giant list of all the answers for every museum on how to reopen safely. I think as a sector, we're all kind of working on this together and learning as we go along, which is why a forum like this is so helpful. But what I will do today is I will showcase the guidelines for the sector and the methodology that we've worked on with MD to help you put the best plan together for your museum so you can provide a safe environment for your staff, your volunteers and your visitors. The other thing I think is worth bearing in mind, because I say we've all got loads of questions, is that normally, of course, you are the experts in how to run your museum successfully. We just find ourselves in different circumstances at the minute where we need to find different ways of doing it. So I firmly feel we have all the answers. It's just going to take us a while to get to them, and the guidelines can help us do that. So I will now move to my next slide. So I'm hoping if we were in a big room, I'd be getting you all to put your hands up to tell me if you've all read the guidelines cover to cover. You may or may not have yet, you might have looked at them, but just to give you a flavour, this is what they are. They're on the NMDC website. AIM was fortunate. We were part of the cross-sector working group that DCMS pulled together to work on this. And I must say, although this has got National Museum Directors Council name on it, this isn't something that was done for national museums or is aimed at them. It you all know that museums are an incredibly broad sector, and the idea is we've got guidance that is applicable to different types and different models of museum. The working group also includes representation from trade unions that are in the museum sector, so that was really helpful, and also Public Health England and the Health and Safety Executive. So you can be assured, and they've been signed off by the Cabinet Office. So the guidance that's in here is government approved, Health and Safety Executive and Public Health England approved. It will change, of course, but you can rely on this as a definitive advice at the moment, which I think is really helpful. What I would say is read it. Obviously, read it. Encourage your staff to read it so you get an idea and use it as the basis for your decision making. Should also say there is other government guidance out there that you'll be aware of. There's generic things about safe workplaces and that sort of thing. But there's also other guidance for our sector, particularly the stuff around heritage and hospitality. That is, some of it might be sort of particularly applicable to your circumstances. So it's worth looking at that as well. The one thing I should say is that it should all complement each other. There shouldn't be anything that contradicts. That's the reason that the government sort of cross-checked it all. But bear in mind, depending on your circumstance, you might want to look at some other guidance as well. Okay, so when we knew the guidance was going to be put together, and it's a meaty document, it's pretty detailed, which is good. I was talking to MD colleagues across the country, as we do regularly, and we thought that, in the spirit that AIM always tries to operate in, we try and make life as easy as possible for our members, we thought it would be really helpful to produce a document that helps museums know where to start with the guidance, because you can read the guidance and think, well, this is very good, but it's like, where do you start? What does this mean for our museum? So we've put together a checklist. It's available on the AIM website as dynamic web pages and also as a PDF. That's a checklist that can help you work through the guidance and make a plan for your museum. So I'm going to use this model now to work through some of the questions you need to be asking yourself, how you might approach them. I also received some of the questions in advance that you'd sent in, and I'm going to try and weave in some of those questions as we go. So, number one thing on the checklist is consultation, and this, you're probably all doing this at the moment. It's the number one thing, even if you're not planning to open for several months, which we know that most museums aren't planning to open at on the 4th of July. They are very much in the minority, so you've got more time, obviously, if you're thinking something further down the line. And this is about talking to staff, to volunteers, and to trustees. And you will know your own best ways of doing this. And there's probably a mixture. It's about some, you might do a sort of general survey, but also one-to-one stuff. You want to really understand what people's concerns are about a safe return to work. What are the things that people are worrying? What do they want from you at the museum? How do they think that they can be supported in their roles? What will make them feel safe? And also on a practical side of things, what ideas do they have about adapting the museum to a sort of COVID-safe operation? We all know that the staff and volunteers, particularly the ones that are in public-facing roles, they know your site best. They know where pinch points are at normal times. They know the routes that people want to use but might not. They will already have their concerns about what might or might not work. So by putting a consultation phase in place, you can sort of extract that information and hopefully help people come together and sort of begin to work out what's the best operating model for your museum. At this point, obviously, if you have contractors in your museums, your cleaning people who are going to be incredibly important moving forward. If that's contracted out, obviously you'll need to start consulting with them and how they're going to be working and that sort of stuff too. So consultation, number one thing, before you and don't go to people with your plans ready-made, consult and bring people with you. Okay, so number two, and although it's number two, I've written on my notes here, this is the most important aspect of your plans. It's about risk assessment. Assessing risk should underpin your whole approach to reopening. It's your legal duty to both your staff, your volunteers, and the public to ensure that you've taken reasonable steps to protect your workers and others from coronavirus. It's the scary bit, but in some ways, this is the bit that you're used to doing anyway. Everyone who operates a museum used to work under Health and Safety at Work Act 1974. And by looking at managing the risk from COVID, it's only the same approach that you would have to managing risk from other hazards in your museum, whether, I don't know, if you've got water on your site or slips and trips or electricity or any other hazards that you have. Risk assessment is applied to those, and you'll now apply risk assessment to COVID. So you will need to review all your activities in light of what we know about COVID. You can use your normal your normal risk assessment templates. You're just bearing in mind you've got a different hazard. My slide here, that's a bit of information from the Health and Safety Executive website. They have got some really good resources that I would suggest you will look at to sort of help you work with this particular risk assessment challenge. Obviously, going back to consultation, consulting staff, volunteers about risk assessment is part of your legal duty on this, so obviously it fits with that too. Here I've put, you should use the Health and Safety Executive Guidance. The guidelines, the NMDC guidelines, they've got a lot on managing risk in section 2.2, so make sure you look at that. You need to share the results of your risk assessment with staff, so it's not something that's just kept in the office and no one knows about. Everyone should understand how it's being done. The Health and Safety Executive website actually has this thing on the picture on the right is a sort of a certificate you can download that you can use to show how you're staying COVID secure by following their sort of main steps. These are their 5 steps to safer working, which I think are really helpful, because it's about carrying out a risk assessment, putting cleaning, hand washing and hygiene procedures in place, taking reasonable steps to help people work from home if they can do that and if that's acceptable for them. It's about social distancing, make sure you've got that in place, and for 2 meters. And if you can't manage 2 meters, you've put other things in place to minimize the risk. So that's quite a useful tool and one that can engender confidence. So you'd probably be looking at doing risk assessment for the different aspects of your museum experience. So the reception, arrival, routes around the museum, use of your facilities, maybe including the toilets, including the shop, including the cafe, how you're managing visitor capacity. You will also need to consider risks for people who fall into more vulnerable groups. There's a lot of information in section 3 of the guidelines that's called Who Should Go to Work. And this talks about who is safe to go to work. Obviously, the government guidance will change over time, but for example, for people who've been deemed the most clinically vulnerable, who've been in the shielding group, at the moment, the government guidance says those people can return to work from the 1st of August. Obviously, within your staff, and this is part of your consultation, those people might be fairly anxious about it, so you'll need to take more time with them. Obviously, people who are BAME, they're from minority ethnic backgrounds, who feel that know that they're at particular risk, they also might have particular concerns, and you might want to do particular assessments about their roles if they're in public facing roles. I know that some organisations have developed particular risk assessments for particular more vulnerable people, so that's all stuff to take on board. I know this is all really, it's hard when it's conceptual and we're not talking about specifics. The good news is that some museums, obviously, who are planning to open early, have been doing their risk assessments already. And Bletchley Park, who are opening on the 4th of July, they have followed absolutely best practice, and they've actually published their COVID-safe risk assessment for visitors on their website already. And I've taken a screenshot here, so you can see the sort of things that they've done. Those of you used to doing risk assessments will see it doesn't have to be overcomplicated. It's all the thought processes you've had already, but you need to put them into a document to show, so it's written so you can share it and show how you work things through. So I won't spend too long on that because we've got a lot to get through, but I would recommend looking, if you want, it's always better to see other people's work first, not have a blank sheet of paper. But if you look at that as an example, and obviously amongst the group here, there will be people who've already started risk assessments. I would really recommend sharing and seeing how other people are approaching things, and you can then adapt to your own circumstances. But there are a lot of questions people have about what must I do about reopening, and risk assessment is is the most important thing, and that comes across very strongly in the good practice guidelines for museums too. Okay, the last thing, and this was when we were the working group was working on the guidelines for museums. We had everything sorted, then it all went off to the government to be checked. And the thing that came in at the last minute was museum requirements around the NHS track and trace service, which is, and this is coming in for lots of public places from the 4th of July. You'll have seen sort of stuff about pubs and restaurants as well, that people are being asked to keep records of who's in their, well, there's staffing records, which is probably a bit easier, who's on the site, but also the visitor records as well. And there are requirements to keep those records securely for 21 days, and they might be drawn on if the need for the track and trace service. This is potentially okay if you're using an online booking system and you've got those electronic records anyway that you can store safely and responsibly within GDPR requirements. We're aware that if you're not using an online system for pre-booking, it presents more problems. Although I have already spoken to one of our members who've put a manual system in place. They've got the plans for doing that safely. So I just wanted to touch on it now because it's something that I don't think any of us were expecting, but it is there. But it's something that MD and other bodies, including ourselves, will look to support you on to find ways to make it work. Okay, you'll be pleased to know that's the health and safety stuff largely done. The next thing, which again is incredibly important, particularly if you're an independent museum, is financial viability. We know that lots of museums are keeping afloat at the minute because they're using the jobs retention scheme. They've minimised their costs while they're closed. Obviously, reopening brings new costs. And although, you know, I've not met a museum yet who doesn't want to be open, who doesn't want to be welcoming visitors, that there is a sort of an economic viability issue to think about. And also a visitor experience viability question. You know, what will you be able to offer to visitors? Is it going to be, you know, do you think that it's meaningful? Does it fit with your purpose? Is it something that is worthwhile? So what we're saying to everyone, and again, this is in the guidelines as well, a sort of an early step needs to be sort of the model, what you can offer visitors when you've done your consultation, when you work out what you might be able to offer. How much is it going to cost you to do that? How much income might you be able to predict? I appreciate that's really hard for people, and put together a new budget, new cash flow. There might be new grants that you'll be able to bring in. And I know that MD have got some good funding through Art Fund, and they'll have support for you that might be able to offset some of the reopening costs. But I know for a lot of museums, their decision on when to reopen is very much determined by the financial viability issue. It's different for everyone, but it's something that literally you can't afford to overlook. The fourth thing is kind of a predictable thing, but you need, you know, as with most things in life, it's best to have a plan, and it's best to have a plan that you've worked on as a team in your museum. So it's not something that just one person has put together and everyone else is a bit confused by. You'll be unsurprised to know I'm saying it must be underpinned by risk assessments. And you plan all the time for things, so I don't need to tell you how to do this. But you need to look at, you know, changes that you need to make if you're making adaptations to the building, buying in new equipment, putting in new booking systems. You need to factor in all that, and also the time for training and time for staff to get used to it. Think about when you're going to bring people back from furlough, the grant funding that you might need, work out availability of volunteers, all that sort of thing. You also very much then need to test things as well. And at this point, this is something that's in the guidelines, but I feel it's important to highlight any adjustments to your visitor offer and to your staff and volunteer roles. You mustn't forget your responsibilities under the Equality Act. So, for example, you must avoid putting disabled workers or visitors at any advantage through the changes that you make, and that's something that you must consider as you go about putting your new plans together. It's, you know, business as usual there. Okay, obviously everyone's plan will be different, and you will need to review it because inevitably things will change over time, and you will learn. The good thing is once you get open and you start dealing with visitors again, you will learn how your plan can be reviewed and tweaked. Okay, communication with staff and volunteers. This isn't new. I think during the lockdown period, everyone has valued good communication. We've all been so isolated, and we're moving into a different phase now, which brings its own anxieties, particularly for people coming back to work for the first time. It's a scary step, and also people who will still be working from home. And how do you keep those people all together, all sort of in the same page, people feeling included and understanding what the goals are for the museum and how everyone is playing a part. You all know how communication works best with your staff and volunteers, and I think a lot of people have worked really hard to try and keep people in the loop during lockdown. I think the danger is as things move to reopening, there's a danger to just focus on the reopening, focus on your visitors, forget about keeping people in the loop, and forget about the need to give people the opportunity to reflect back on what's going to be working in really often quite difficult circumstances and emotionally charged circumstances for people. And I say you also very much need to consider people who will remain at home because they're still working from home, or that their circumstances mean that they're not able to come into the workplace yet. So again, I know it's an obvious thing, but you all know we all like to be well communicated with. So you must make sure that's part of your plans. And closely allied for that is it's all about well-being for your staff and volunteers. Obviously, this, again, I'm stating the obvious. This is really hard stuff for everyone. If you're anything like me, I feel like I felt like I'm on my knees almost every week for the last 13 years. But we've carried on, we've kept going. But as people move back into the workplace, they'll perhaps have different roles, new ways of working. They'll be concerned about how they manage visitors, how they do the social distancing. So you need to think about the support systems that you have to people, how people can share concerns. And I know in the guidelines, again, there's quite a lot of information on this. And if you don't have mental health first aiders in your workforce already, that could be something that you might think about, because I think we'll all agree that our mental health has rarely been under more strain than it has been recently. And I think that as people deal with new situations, they need that chance to feel that they can share concerns and reflect on their experiences. And just as, if you're managing staff or volunteers, just making sure that people, feel that they can come to you with their concerns. That's never been more important, I don't think. Okay, so communicating with your visitors. This, again, is something that if kind of we know what we're all doing, it's easy to forget that our visitors don't know. And it goes back to what I said in the first instance about, although museums can open from the 4th of July, that isn't going to apply to that very many museums. If you're a member of the public who's just been seeing the government messages, you perhaps assume that every museum is going to open. But of course, we know they're not, and there are good reasons for that. So the first thing I would say is when you have some clarity about if you're opening or when you're opening, tell people, let people know. Lots of your audience you have already, they'll be really keen to know how you're doing. You've perhaps kept in touch with them during the lockdown. So let them know when you're reopening, or if you don't know when, why, or what are the work is you're needing to do. And you can get past that. We're a little bit concerned that in some areas, if one organisation opens and another doesn't, people will sort of jump to conclusions. So keep people in the loop. Then when you are opening, I think this is really important, to let people know what they can expect from a visit to you. How are you going to keep them safe? If any of you have been looking at the ALVA research, which is available on the AIM website, you'll know that confidence in visiting museums amongst the public is rising, but people want to know that you've put their provisions in place. So if you can put your COVID safe sort of procedures, what people can expect, photos of maybe queuing systems, information about how you book, if you've got a booking system in place on your website, they will feel secure. We also know from that research that whilst visitors feel that museums will do the right thing, they will put the right procedures in place, they're really concerned about the behaviour of other visitors. So again, if you can reassure people that we have got members of staff, volunteers placed to help you with your visit, make sure that we keep to social distancing, we've got good systems in place, again, that will reassure people. The flip side of this, of course, is what you're expecting from your visitors. So when they turn up, it won't be the same as a normal visit. So, you know, the expectation you have on how they behave, and from very obvious things like you must not come if you've got any of the COVID symptoms, through to, you know, you'll be expected to queue. The toilets will or won't be open, and this is how they'll operate. The cafe will or won't be open. This, you'll be able to see this, but this may not be available. So people know. I think the best thing you can do with this at the moment is look at examples of places already open and how they're handling this. I tweeted this morning, it's gone sort of viral through the museum world. The Dutch Museum, the Marit House, they've got a video that they've put about what people can expect from a visit. The Bletchley Park website that I've mentioned, they've got some good stuff. Historic Royal Palaces, and Chester Zoo in our very own region, they've got some really good stuff on their website about how they're communicating with their visitors about what people can expect when they come. The other thing you might want to look at is Visit Britain have got this good to go mark that you can sign up to show people, to communicate to your visitors that you've done all the right things to make their visit as safe as possible. It's a self-assessment framework that they do sort of check in on. It won't be right for every museum. It's mainly aimed at sort of tourism and hospitality businesses, but depending on your museum circumstances, it might be something that you want to look at if you think it will help you communicate how your approach with your visitors. The other thing that I think is a soft thing, but one not to underestimate, is using your local network. And by this, I mean the place where you're situated. So, you know, your local chamber of commerce, your local contractors, neighbouring cultural organisations, lots of people are going through the same sort of reopening questions, whether you're running a shop or a museum or sort of a leisure facility. Everyone's going through this same sort of thing together. And the answers to questions like, who can I get to put up purpose-built screens for me? Where can I buy hand sanitizer units? There's probably people in your local network that might be able to help more readily than people further away in the museum world. So don't ignore your museum network. The post just come and the dog's barking, so sorry about that. So don't forget your local network, and if you're well connected, I'm sure you will get really good support from other people through your through that. And of course, your museum network. You're all here today, and hopefully the numbers haven't been gone down while I've been speaking. So, you know, our museum networks have never been more important, I think, just to keep us all feeling supported, but also for practical things, sharing plans. Joanne said at the beginning about having sort of further MD seminars, looking at particular issues you'll need to tackle. That's all important. If we're going to get through this, we will get through it together through doing that sort of thing. Museum development have got lots of resources. The South East have got a reopening toolkit that goes into quite a lot of detailed areas that you can help with. You can ask us. We've got our own Zoom workshops, and there's specialist advice out there. I know someone had asked questions about working with schools and how you can do that. So GEM, the Group for Education in Museums, they're really concentrating on that and looking at it. So use your networks more than ever. We all need them at the minute, so there's no shame in asking, and there's a chance that a problem you've solved, someone else wants the answer to, and problems that other people are already solving, they can help you with your answers. My final thing in the checklist is about being flexible. It's, you know, we all know that, you know, it's a cliche to say these are uncertain times. They are really uncertain times. Flexibility might be required if you find yourself in a local lockdown situation, you need to shut down again. But more importantly, I think reopening will be very much a learning experience. Some things that are in your plans you'll find work brilliantly. Other things need adapting. People won't behave quite how you expect, or your staff will report that actually it doesn't really work if they're doing that sort of thing at that time of day. So you'll need to be adapt. It's a learning experience, and I think that is going to be the most valuable way to make sure that we continue to support our visitors, our staff, and our volunteers through this. Okay, so that's going through the checklist, which hopefully will help you give you an idea of how to get into your the guidelines and how to put together robust plans for your museums. I do have a slide. I don't know if you want me to stop because of timing yet. By all means, pop up and tell me stop. But I just wanted to touch on a few FAQs, the questions that keep coming up. And I should say the answers to all of these are they're in the guidelines, but it's nice to draw them out because I know they're questions on the top of people's list. So I'm just going to go through these quickly, but we can come back to them in the Q&A. So a lot of people are saying, when can our volunteers come back? Well, volunteers, in terms of health and safety, your duties to look after your volunteers under the Health and Safety Act are the same as staff. They, you know, you need to make sure that you have a safe working environment for them. So volunteer roles need to be considered in any risk assessments, like staff roles. Obviously, with volunteers, they can choose whether they want to come back or not. They might have particular personal circumstances where they don't feel they can at the minute. They don't want to. Of course, that's absolutely fine. Other volunteers will be very keen to come back. It'll depend what your operating model is, how and where you feel that you can use them. Obviously, this comes back to the consultation stage. Find out what volunteers feel, what they want to do, what their feelings are. Obviously, some volunteers might fall into clinically vulnerable groups, in which case you will need to comply with government guidelines. But as I say, people who have been shielding, they are being told they can go back to the workplace from the 1st of August. So even volunteers who might have been in that group, if you've risk assessed the roles and they can come back from the 1st of August, that would be fine. But you need to look at it on a risk assessment basis. There's not a different rule for volunteers than there is for staff. They're all people that we need to keep safe. Toilets, we're all really interested in toilets from the point of view, not least if you go somewhere, will you be able to find one to use? There isn't a hard and fast rule on if you should open your toilets or not. It very much depends on how you assess the risk around them. So if you feel that you can manage the social distancing, how many people go in or out, maybe you need someone to monitor the queue, that you might increase your cleaning regime of the toilets. They're in a place where people can access them easily in the museum. You might be able to open them. I know, for example, Bletchley Park, they do have open toilets, and they're also bringing in some extra temporary toilets, it says on their website. So again, you need to look at it through your situation. But, you know, please, if your toilets aren't going to be available, do tell people before they come. Otherwise, there's no faster way to make people literally uncomfortable. Social distancing measures, how do you go those? You'll know already, people are putting in loads of things, and there's loads in the guidelines on this, but from one-way systems to markers on the floor to keeping people in sort of big spread out areas. There are lots of solutions to this that, again, will be different. And a lot of it is about encouraging good behaviour from people when they come, and making sure that your staff and volunteers in public-facing roles feel empowered to enforce the social distancing and monitor any pinch points that you might have identified. People ask often about interactives. If any of you came to the AIM virtual conference a couple of weeks ago, you'll remember Steve Garden from the Roald Dahl Museum talking about he has a museum that is mainly based on interactives, which are very difficult to make safe at the moment. It might be that you can, again, you'll need to risk assess this. You might feel that it's too difficult to manage and you'll just need to make interactives not available. I've heard of some places where instead of having sort of hands-on experiences, they're going to bring in actors to sort of animate areas rather than hands-on stuff. Or it might be that you feel there are things that if things are wiped down after every user and cleaned more regularly, you can make them work. Ticketing systems is another thing. Obviously, if you have booking systems, this is a good way of managing social distancing, making sure you don't breach your visitor capacity. There are obviously manual ways of developing systems. If you have bookings in place for events at the moment, or maybe workshops in holidays, you can just use a phone booking system for people. That's fine. It just depends if you can cope on the capacity. There are free ways of doing it through things like Eventbrite. And I know from an AIM perspective, we have lots of ticketing suppliers who would be keen to talk to you about putting in a web-based solution for you. Again, it will be up to you to work out what is appropriate and workable for your museum. Obviously, if you have a ticketing system, that does make things a little easier. And I think members of the public are going to be getting used to that for lots of types of services at the moment. And the final thing I had in FAQs with working with schools, I think, I'm not an education expert, but I think it's highly unlikely that schools are going to be on physical visits to museums in the foreseeable future. Obviously, lots of people have been working on creating virtual learning experiences. I know that I've seen stuff that GEM are doing on making COVID-safe loan boxes, and there are examples of that you can look at, and sort of providing materials for virtual classrooms. I think museums are going to be incredibly needed for schools to provide engaging education, particularly from September. But the traditional school visit is probably not going to be something that's on the cards for a while. But that will be something to look at, and it'll be one of the things you'll sort of do a much deeper dive into. Okay, so you've not cut me off, so I presume I've not run over too much. I hope that kind of all made sense. Uh, I've just put a couple of links on there. Do keep talking to us. We are here to help you as our MD. As I said, I think the only way we're going to get all through this is by all working together and sticking together as a museum community. So don't be shy. Come and talk to us, even if you just want to share your concerns and have someone new to talk to. At AIM, we're always happy to talk to you, even if you're not a member. We're still very happy to talk to you. Okay, so Kay's appeared, so I think I can hand back to you, Kay.
That's perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much, Emma. It was just
stop
so
sharing, shall I?
Oh, yes, please. It was really useful, really helpful, some really great insight, and it's generated quite a lot of content on the chat that we can come back to. So keep those questions and comments coming. We're going to take a 5-minute break, just if anybody needs to refresh their drink or nip to the facilities or think some more about your questions, do keep popping them in, and we'll be back in 5 minutes to come back with your Q&A. Lovely. See you in 5.
Bye.
Right, so I think we're going to start reading out some of the questions. So I think Joe from Museum Development Yorkshire is going to put the first question to Emma and to us.
Okay, thanks, Kay. Yes, so we had quite a lot of questions there and some really great ones, I think, covering probably a lot of the kind of chief concerns. So I thought I'd just lead with a question about face coverings, Emma. Obviously, this was an area that I think was dropped into the guidelines and seems to have been a bit of a surprise in some ways, but what are we seeing and what's your feeling about kind of practice and policy with regard to face coverings for staff or volunteers?
I think obviously the only legal requirement in England at the minute is to wear face coverings on public transport. There's not anything legal elsewhere. The impression I get is that the guidance is clear that people shouldn't wear clinical level PPE unless their job normally demands that. So there are perhaps some conservators who would do normally this sort of thing. And there's PPE required, for example, if you're in first aid roles and that sort of thing. But for general interaction with visitors, I think it's something that a lot of museums are talking about in their consultation stages. If staff and volunteers feel most comfortable wearing face coverings, that's fine. There's this difference between face masks and clinical grade PPE that you'd have in hospitals, which we don't want museums to be buying and taking away if we don't need it. So there's face coverings that you can make at home. I've got one that I made earlier up there, Blue Peter style. So some places that if staff feel most comfortable doing it, that's fine, and accommodate their wishes. And again, some visitors might come and feel most comfortable doing that. That's fine. Again, on some of the websites I've seen where people are already having visitors back, they've generally said things like, you're welcome to wear a face covering, but it's not mandatory for our visitors. Again, I think that is part of that consultation. If people do wear face coverings, obviously that does bring about other considerations that you have to think about people sort of when they take them off and where they put them, and disposing of them safely. So it's part of that conversation. I dare say some people on the call have already had that discussion already.
Yes, yeah, thanks, Emma. And I think noticing just generally in terms of shops and things, you tend to find that workers who are on the shop floor are not wearing face coverings, but perhaps if they're serving and in closer contact situations, then they are having some kind of protection. And maybe it's about that.
Yeah, and I think it comes, if, for example, you're doing your risk assessment for the sort of museum reception desk and people who are welcoming people into the museum, you can talk about the mitigating factors. So you might make sure you've got contactless payments, you've got perspex screens, you've got the social distancing. But I think if the feeling is from members of staff that we'd feel most comfortable wearing a face mask, it's easy to get on face covering. Well, then that's something museums should accommodate and make those available to people, or they might want to wear their own. I know some of this is something we can look at, like you say, other local businesses. One of the local shops in my small town, they've actually had branded face coverings done for their staff that they're wearing in public facing roles. So again, it's something that each organisation needs to work out what works best for them, but staff need to feel safe, and if it helps them feel safe, I think that's good. If they don't feel that it's necessary, well, that's another conversation.
And I think I'd just add to that as well about clearly communicating that to visitors as well, what they could expect in terms of face covering and people wearing face coverings, because some people might find it quite intimidating, but also there might be access issues as well. So if you've got people that rely on lip reading, so it's a bit of a balance really, but like Emma said, it's about consulting with your staff and volunteers and what makes them feel comfortable.
Yeah, there is quite long sort of discussion of the situation, which, as with lots of things around COVID, it isn't wholly sort of straightforward, but the guidelines do have quite good stuff. And I can say that the working group did have direct discussions with people from Public Health England on should we just make them compulsory or not, and all those sort of conversations. And this is kind of where it's got to. Obviously things might change and public attitudes might change, and I think people might start to wear face coverings more often, and your museum needs to reflect the sort of needs of staff and visitors, I think.
Yeah, so in a way, whatever situation you put in place now, I think with everything, be prepared, it may change. That's the thing, isn't it? Okay, I think over to Kay for the next question.
Yeah, just read out a few comments actually. So Perrette from Bolton Museum says she lip reads and she can't communicate well when people are wearing masks, as well as other people in deaf community. Particularly, they may only be necessary sort of in enclosed spaces where you can ensure social distancing. So that's definitely something to consider. I'll move on to another question, but do keep things coming in chat. So somebody mentioned early on about ticketing systems and asked if anyone was using the Art Fund free ticketing system. Now we know there are a lot of museums and some large museum services using that, and that's available on the Art Fund website. There's more information on there. And there's other free ticketing services as well, like Ticket Source. So do share what you're using in the chat. It may be really useful for people. Even though it's called art tickets, it's not just for art organisations, it is applicable for the cultural sector, but we're also trying to get a list of ticketing systems that are compatible with Audience Finder as well. So when we get that list from the Audience Agency, we can circulate that if it's useful for those that are using Audience Finder. Is there anything else to say on ticketing systems? I think a few people said, do we still need to do it if we're a very small organisation for track and trace?
No, it's, the requirement is, I'm just looking here at this is the information that was put into the museum guidelines, and it's the same information that's in all the sort of our sector guidelines, really, for heritage and all those sort of people too. It says you should assist this service by keeping a temporary record of your staff shift patterns, customers and visitors for 21 days in a way that is manageable for your business, and assist NHS test and trace with requests for that data if needed. It says many businesses that take bookings already have systems for recording their customers and visitors. If you do not already do this, you should do so to help fight the virus. We will work with industry and relevant bodies to design this system in line with data protection legislation and set out details shortly. Now, the working group that we were part of to produce the guidelines, that is still ongoing. And in fact, I have another meeting of it this afternoon. So I'm hoping there might be a bit more information available for people soon. I think the answer is you don't have to have, the booking system needs to be right for your scale of operation, and how many visitors you expect, and it can be done manually. We think people just need to sort of take names and contact details so that they could be used by the NHS to get back in touch with people, obviously keep it securely and all that sort of thing. But there's more, the government sort of said we will set out more details shortly, but you certainly don't need to have an electronic system if that's not appropriate for your type of operation.
Yeah, thanks. There's a few more bits on track and trace actually, whilst we're on this sort of talking about ticketing systems. Somebody asked if there was a national database or whether this should be done on a local level. My understanding is that it's local level.
Oh yeah, it's local, and then you keep that data safe in the same way that you'd keep any data safe that you're taking from people. So that might literally be in your museum safe or in a secure bit of your IT system, and you keep it just for 21 days. So yeah, it's as things stand at the minute, that's all a local thing.
Great, thank you. I think another comment was on do the people that are working for Track and Trace have to demonstrate a legitimate interest in having your data? You know, I suppose I don't really know how that works.
I have to be honest, I have no idea how that side of it works. That would be something that we'd need to find out from that agency. I don't even know anyone yet who's been contacted by it. I don't know if anyone on the call has someone who has been contacted. I presume that there are ways that you can see that is a legitimate request, but that I don't have that information. Need to check their website in the first instance.
Yeah, so if we find out more information on that, we can share that after the session today. Okay, thanks.
Sorry, Ian.
Yeah,
I was just going to say, I could see someone had asked about, is collecting the visitor data mandatory for Track and Trace? Is it? I don't. The way it's written at the minute, it says you should assist this service by keeping a temporary record. It's not saying it's a legal requirement, but obviously it's something that there's an expectation. Sorry, Ian.
No, I was just going to pick up on the Track and Trace. We'd had an earlier comment really of just about making sure that you're also perhaps review your GDPR as well, just to make sure that you're in line with that. You'll all have those policies already, so just really making sure that tallies up and you're in shape on that front.
Yeah, I've seen one museum I was talking to say that they will have to produce a statement to say we are asking for this information to assist with the NHS Test and Trace service, and it will be kept by us for 21 days solely for this purpose and then destroyed. So yes, as you would do. That is the deal. No, the 20, someone asked about the 21 days. No, that is just for this test and trace thing. Obviously other data has different lifespans and different ways of dealing with it.
Just two other comments. Sorry to pick up on. There's been quite a few around schools, perhaps unsurprisingly, schools and their involvement with museums obviously very important, both financially and in terms of the activity of museums. So it's quite interesting actually, because there seems to be a varied picture from the comments that people are making. Some people have been contacted by schools about visits in autumn. Other areas it looks like there's going to be a moratorium on school visits until the new year. I guess there's a local picture there which you'll need to check into, and also, of course, be very careful in relation to your own risk assessment of what's going on in the schools front. Emma, I don't know if you have any other comments to make on that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the school thing is a whole other topic to look at, but I think there's two sides of it. One, there's what schools will want and what they're someone said, with taking bookings, well, that's great, if that desire is there. But equally then from the museum perspective is what you feel you'll be able to safely offer in September or October, and we don't quite know the circumstances we'll be working under then, but if people look at what their school's offer is now, that then you can assess against what might be feasible, that perhaps need to be adaptation. So I sincerely hope that schools will be engaging robustly with museums, and there will be the chance for lots of stuff, but it really is one of those crystal ball things at the minute that it's hard enough to know what position schools are going to be in full stop in September, let alone schools and museums. I think people can risk assess and plan and talk to schools if you can, talk to your sort of education networks. I don't know how much time they'll have or how much they'll have thought about the museum side of things, but that is certainly something to put on your to-do list.
Okay, Joe, go on.
Sorry, we're just going to pick up. There's been quite a bit of discussion in the chat about over 70s and obviously being classified as vulnerable to COVID, and really advice about how to support over 70s in terms of returning to the workplace and advice relating to those. Yeah.
I mean, I think obviously it's not for museums to make up government guidance on how different groups should be looked after. I think one of the things that's worth pointing out is that there has been sort of wide public misconception about people in the over 70s age group and what they should do. There's a difference between people who are being deemed as extremely clinical clinically vulnerable and asked to shield. And personally, I've been in that category. I've not been out of the house for many, many days, which is, I seem a bit crazed. That's probably why. And I say for people who are in that most at risk age group, it's not an age group, most at risk category. So there are young people as well as older people. It depends on the government definition of most clinically vulnerable. Those people have been told you can go back to work from the 1st of August if, you know, it's a COVID safe workplace. People who are over 70 were asked to sort of adhere to the social distancing guidelines stringently. So they didn't have different things in place, but they were just asked to sort of really take them seriously. So I think that in terms of over 70s, they, you know, unless people have specific conditions or particular circumstances that make them more vulnerable, they need to be risk assessed like everyone else. And as part of that consultation phase, people feel that they have got particular circumstances that needs to be taken into account. But as far as the way I see it at the minute, and you know, it's always worth double checking, people who are over 70 should be able to return to volunteer roles as, you know, in line with the sort of unlocking guidance as it goes. So at the moment, if you're over 70, you can go to the shops, you can do all the things that everyone else can do. You're just asked to make sure you adhere to the social distancing. So, for example, if there was a volunteer role where museums couldn't maintain the 2-meter social distancing for whatever reason, well, that would be a higher risk activity that I think you would need to think, you know, really consider and maybe think that actually isn't doable. But I'm sorry, I'm afraid it's hard to talk in absolutes, but I think it's really important to be clear that over 70s aren't necessarily in the most clinically vulnerable group. That is a different thing, but I think that has been a bit confused over the last few months, and people have looked at that.
And this is probably an area, Emma, where it goes back to the question of conversation and consultation within
exactly. And you know, particularly with volunteers who are over 70, as I say, see, volunteers, if they're over 70, they might have grandchildren that they really want to spend their time seeing them, you know, if they've not been able to date. They might not be keen to come back, but equally I know that a lot of museum volunteers are incredibly keen to support their museum again. So the onus is to sort of look at how that can be done. And obviously, you know, remote volunteering opportunities for people who aren't able to be on site are really important. So I'll try and keep people involved. You know, most of us just want to be involved and useful at the moment. And I think that's where a lot of volunteers wanting to come back is driven by, you know, people want to, you know, they're passionate about the museums they're volunteering. They want to be involved in whatever way is safe in the future.
Thanks, Emma. Kay?
That's great. Yeah, so that kind of, it all links into good communications, doesn't it? So there's been a lot of chat about how we communicate really well with our visitors, you know, so on our websites and any communications that we put out, but also keeping up that dialogue with volunteers and staff about the environment that you're working in, what they can expect. And I guess for volunteers, it's kind of up to them if they choose to come back and when, I suppose, where it's different, I suppose, for staff.
I think there's also perhaps a sort of museum capacity thing, because as we all know, managing volunteers well and safely is a capacity issue. And it might be that when museums first open, they feel that they're keeping a very sort of limited offer and maybe a sort of limited number of staff, and it might be possible to phase volunteer roles back in. Obviously some museums are wholly volunteer run, some volunteers provide different services. It'll be different for everyone, but there's also the option of looking at a phased approach and so saying we're going to test this and then we're going to look at see how volunteer roles fit with it. But it will be different for every museum, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, that's lovely, thank you. Ian, have you got any comments on?
Yeah, we've had some quite interesting comments actually around handling items, things that people touch in museums, so dressing up collections, for example, or indeed items in shops. And I think some people are understandably taking the line that they're going to withdraw those collections, and that's a simple risk assessment response. If you're worried about those things, is just to take the risk away by not having them. That may be the shops, perhaps a grayer area. Again, Emma, do you have any comments on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think handling items and stuff are really high risk. So unless you feel like you've done a really robust risk assessment and feel that it's safe, I think it's also the sort of stuff that visitors would be incredibly cautious about engaging with. So that's, you know, I think that might be the sort of visitor offer that most places will make sort of shy away from, and a risk assessment will probably find that, you know, sort of dealing with dressing up clothes and that sort of thing, gosh, you know, you'd almost have to have sort of a laundry on the go all the time, I should imagine, to do that safely, which, you know, would not be a viable activity. Somebody in the chat, I noticed a mention about book sales, and which reminds me, I was in a similar webinar the other day that involved libraries who were also getting ready for reopening, and just on books, and this comes back to handling. Libraries are following an approach where when books are returned, they're going to be quarantined for 72 hours before they're available for to go out of stock again. That's the guidance for them on, you know, the safe period to quarantine a book for. So that's worth bearing in mind. And also they're being encouraged to make displays that people don't touch to get away from that. So I think that sort of guidance is handy for museums when we're looking at people handling and touching things as well.
Because I think the specific concern that was raised in the chat was also about volunteers in the shop, volunteers running the shop, worrying about touching the things that have been touched by members of the public.
Yeah, well, obviously, you know, if you're running a shop, you need to have a robust approach, and it might be that people are not allowed to pick up items, and they choose things, and you get them from stock. I don't know, but I think, you know, this is the sort of thing that you need to look at. There is obviously specific guidance for the retail sector because shops are already open. So I would be looking to draw on that to get solid guidance on, you know, where the risks are in touching items. But there are, you know, you'll need to find your own approach on that.
Okay, thanks, Emma. Joe.
Thanks. We had a question earlier on, Emma, about, and it's very relevant to us as MD as well, but obviously about the possibility of museums hosting conference-type meetings, the meetings, church meetings, maybe within their spaces. Currently, as far as I'm aware, the guidance is around gatherings of no more than, is it 30 people?
Yeah.
This is where, as you're referring to with retail, this reference to other sector guidance comes in. Can you give us any other indications around that? And, you know,
so what about having groups in? Yeah, I mean, the way I see it at the moment is that need to go through it. You know, you're not meant to have more than it. You're not, when you have people in your space, bringing them together as 30 people is something you should avoid and keep people apart. People are only meant to be meeting with up to 6 people from other households. So that's the thing. So until the guidance change, sort of general meetings and stuff are not, I think that's not an area we can go into just yet. But it will perhaps change. But yes, because I think I've not read the guidance on churches and this sort of thing yet, but I don't think having a sort of group meeting of 30 different people from different houses is not within the guidelines at the minute. So I don't think that should be doing. I say museums are asked in our guidelines to make sure that large groups don't form in spaces in your museum. Yeah, someone's put about ceremony, like weddings and things. So yes, you can, that would come in for a wedding. That's very specific guidance for weddings, how you can do that and maintain the social distancing, and you don't have a reception and all that sort of thing. But I don't think sort of general community meetings and stuff. But yeah, we're all working it out as we go along, aren't we?
So and maybe focus on small wedding provision is the way to go for our venues.
Yeah, I think unfortunately a lot of people do weddings and it's a very nice income stream, but it's going to be a much more limited income stream for the foreseeable future, because obviously even if you're even if you're hosting a ceremony, that you won't be putting on any reception and that sort of thing. But also you'd have to make sure that space was clear and no one else was going to go in it and all that. It's tricky stuff for people to work out.
Yeah.
Yeah, someone said church guidance is still people can only go into church for individual prayer. So obviously that might change. And I think some of our museum spaces might find themselves in demand in future, but we will have to move very carefully with what the guidance is and also what we feel as museum managers and responsible, what we can cope with safely as well. We're not obliged to do things just because we can.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Emma. Kay?
I think there was a few comments around kind of waste disposal and hand sanitizers, and somebody saying they work for a council museum where they have to specify the alcohol content of the hand sanitizers, detail the cleaning regimes, and then also a few comments around waste disposal. So how do staff and volunteers feel about emptying bins that might be full of dirty tissues and things like that? And I guess, you know, we've touched on this before. I think that's about what staff feel comfortable with, having clear protocols, and I guess maybe some staff training around those as well. But yeah, you were saying about the books with the 72 hours. I suppose that might correspond to other things as well. Maybe people.
Yeah, I think things like litter disposal and what have you, that doesn't come into, that's not in specific museum reopening guidelines, but that will be in workplace guidelines. And yes, there are protocols that are set out for dealing with that. And obviously, it's about risk assessment, but it's also making sure what sort of bins you have. Are they, you know, open bins or closed bins, and bins that people don't have to touch anything and they've got the correct PPE and gloves and that's disposed of properly and that sort of thing. I've also seen on some open air museum sites that are open saying they're not providing bins at the moment, and they're asking people to take their litter home. Now, obviously, that brings its own risks that unfortunately people don't, as we know, don't always adhere to it, and they may leave litter, which brings its own problems. But that, you know, at one end of the options is that, you know, you don't have litter bins and you ask everyone to look after their own litter. But that, you know, that's an extreme example. But I think that guidance is in, if you go into health and safety executive and look at the workplace guidance, that sort of stuff does come into there. And obviously, if you're part of a local authority, these aren't questions that only museums will be asking. They will be common to other workplaces. Oh, look, Alex has got something up already. Yes, and I've seen this debate, the hand dryers versus paper towels. Again, that brings its own questions, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Is there any other comments that we've missed on that point, Ian?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that there was a couple on social distancing earlier in the thread, and I think one concern that people have there was just around, you know, whether they're providing guidance or in some sense trying to enforce that provision, as it were. I think we've all of us in recent times been in supermarkets and had that experience of the person who seems to ignore you in the aisle and when everyone else is doing it. So I guess it's how that translates and what we should expect of sort of museum staff and volunteers in relation to trying to manage that. Again, are there any thoughts on that, Emma?
Well, one thing I think might hearten people that I know has come from the ALVA research and the experience of particularly garden attractions that are already open, is that generally when people, this is perhaps different to going to the supermarket, when people have visited sort of gardens and heritage sites, they've generally been on very best behaviour. It's been a sort of special and much cherished outing, and people have been very willing to comply and have been, sort of very well behaved. And I've not heard of any sites where there have been difficulties. So that is something. And I think, you know, the relationships museums have with their visitors is very different to the one that supermarkets have with their customers. So, and pubs have with their customers, come to that, and this sort of thing. So I think we can capitalize on that, you know, good relationship and that sort of, you know, personal responsibility and looking after each other and being part of the community, that side of things. I think that there's the mixture of sort of asking people and sort of the expectation, and also having sort of a staff within the training for front-facing roles discussing the approach you'll take with people and the tone you'll take. And I assume that most places won't want to have people with a megaphone going, "Get back, stand back, get away," but it will be more of a sort of, "Oh, please, can you just make sure that you're, you know, you seem to have strayed, can you still do that?" And also making sure that, you know, the physical routes that you're offering people don't sort of encourage people to sort of bunch up, and making sure that you do have people to, I mean, I think most people want to go out and have a safe visit, and their anxiety is that they won't be able to, so they do want to comply. So we just need to do that. Again, it's not like people who going to the beach. It's a different relationship, I think, with museums and heritage sites.
We've just had a follow-up question, actually, Emma, which is about chairs in museum spaces and galleries, places for people to sit, and again, what the advice is in relation to that, whether to take them away. Obviously,
I mean, that's a sort of very specific question that I don't think we've actually got an answer to. And I think, my sort of snap feeling is obviously chairs are important from an access perspective for people whose mobility perhaps isn't so great and need places to have a rest. So you want to think of that, but the cleaning regime you need to make sure to do it safely. And I can see that Pierrette has from Bolton, as you see, this is it. We've got the answers between ourselves. She said, we are keeping large, fixed, easy to clean seating, removing the carry-round folding stools and soft cushion chairs. So yes, you can do all this, but you need to have a cleaning regime to match it. And so what you don't want to do is take things away and ruin the visitor experience for people when there are other ways of providing a safe environment.
Okay.
So yeah, everyone will find their own solution.
Okay, or Joe, do you have other things?
Yeah, a little higher up, we had a question about being prepared to lock down again. I suppose this is a question that we could, a conversation we could have with Leicester, unfortunately in this situation. But we talked earlier on about re-lockdown, and it's not really covered by the guidelines, is it? But any thoughts, Emma, on that area and preparing for that possibility?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously everyone did it back in March with sort of no warning, and one of the things I think also came into the chat earlier is we have learned a lot through all this. We've not necessarily always had time to reflect and think on it. So I think as part of your reopening plan, one of the useful and sort of healthy discussions to have with staff is how the lockdown works, what you do differently again, and build that into any plans for if a lockdown does come quickly, and get it written down so it's not being done on the hoof with people saying, well, what should we do about this, and shall I switch this off, and do I leave the fridge door open, and try and use the learning experience that we all had in a sort of very, very short notice situation in March to put that into your reopening plan.
Absolutely. So a kind of shutdown protocol, really, for when if this happens again. Yeah. Great. Thanks, Emma. Kay, have you got anything?
Yeah, I think we just might have time for one more before I guess we start to wrap up. But there was something about Dutch museums being spaces for schools, sort of extra classroom space. And I know there's a lot of conversation that's been going on across the Bridge network, but also the architect of my primary school is a museum, looking at whether this is feasible or not. I'm not quite sure where that conversation's up to, but there is some interesting thinking going on around that, isn't there?
Yeah, I've not been sort of actively involved. I know the Museums Association are sort of working hard on that, as are Jen. Yeah, what was it, #MyPrimarySchool at the museum, and it's a thing that's already going, and there are primary schools that come and live at museums for a while, and they're looking at the possibilities of that going forward, and looking at making the case for funding, because I think schools try and get back to normal. If they are short on space, museums may have space that can offer, and obviously again it might be a way that we could be useful, but also it might be a way of providing a new stream of income for some places that will be lacking it in other areas. Obviously it will need a huge amount of thinking through to make it safe and fit, but yes, it would be really nice to think that could be a possibility.
Yeah, and
Alex has put up a link.
Yeah, shared something, and we'll keep sharing through Museum Development Network as well. I guess there's a few things that spring to mind that potentially it'd only work if your museum is down the road from the school, that kind of hyper-localness of it. But also people have sort of mentioned maybe it's a way to retain some museum staff as well, so museum educators being used as teachers as well, or additional capacity for schools.
I very firmly believe that, as March seems like a lifetime ago. We're now just in July. September, October is a different land, and that I firmly believe there will be some opportunities of ways of working differently and making new connections and new partnerships and using our museums differently, maybe in ways we've not even thought about yet. But, you know, as ever, we're all pretty good at sort of seizing opportunities where they come along and assessing them. So I think we should be open to those possibilities as well as a sector and as individual organisations too.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think, as you said before, perhaps we've not all had time to kind of reflect back on you know, what's happened over the last sort of 3 months, really, and actually trying to find some headspace to do that, because actually it was quite incredible how quickly museums moved and going into lockdown, and all the amazing things that they've done to try and continue to engage with their audiences. Lots of learning there, which will probably affect us going forward in a really positive way. But I think it just shows how adaptable the museum sector really is.
Yeah, I think that is, you know, if people are starting to start that consultation process and going back in, I think you're right, Kate, and this comes back to the sort of the well-being point, giving people the space to reflect on stuff, because I don't know that lots of us have done that, because we've been so busy getting from day to day, and, you know, people looking after children or trying to sort of do the work that you're trying to do, or work out if you can get a supermarket delivery and that sort of thing. People haven't had the chance, and I think as we do move into a different phase for everyone's well-being, I think if you can create the space for staff and volunteers to share and reflect, that would be a really healthy thing to do.
That's great, thank you. So we might not have answered all the questions, but we've covered quite a lot, really. But what we will do, we will have a transcript of today. So all the links that have been shared, we will share those with the delegates, and potentially more widely through the Museum Development Network again. And as I say, this is being recorded along with the subtitles, and it will be made available. And again, AIM will probably share that, as well as your local museum development teams, and potentially the Museum Development Network more widely as well. So you'll be able to look back on it and share it with colleagues as well. So I'll just say thank you very much to Emma again. And I'm going to hand over to Jo to do the final bits and pieces. Oh, and Ian as well. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Kay. Yeah, just to pick up again on the reminder about the additional sessions that will be following up on this in detail. I mentioned in the chat, each region will be running two 2-hour online sessions going into detail on the visitor facilities side particularly, and that will be with Ben Mellum. So we're really looking forward to that in the next couple of weeks, and the dates will be coming out imminently. So do watch out for that. We're also going to be doing sessions on family-friendly approaches, disability access, and more work around collections. So please do watch out for those sessions, and it will be great to get your input, as well as being able to share the information that we're able to bring to you. Kay has talked about this session still being available, so do please obviously signpost other people to this. That will be fantastic. And your regional team will each be sending you a link to our evaluation survey, obviously, for this session. So please do fill in our evaluation. It all helps us to know what you need from us, and it helps us to make the case to Arts Council so that we can continue to support you. So do please respond to that. I think that's it from me. Thanks ever so much for joining us. Ian.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to thank Emma for a brilliant presentation and for answering all our difficult questions. Having been rather on the spot today. But I also just wanted to ask Emma, we just said what MD is going to be doing. What more is AIM got in mind? What are you working on going forward in addition to what you've just presented to us?
Yes, I think the sort of the main strand of support is our Hallmarks at Home sort of Zoom workshops we're doing, which have been small group sessions of up to about 10 people, usually with an expert looking at, you know, they've been looking at aspects of dealing with the crisis that we're in. We've got a programme of those that go right through to the end of August at the minute, and we will be putting on new ones depending on need and what people want. So, for example, I think we've got one coming up next week, which is with an architect who's talking about how you can adapt spaces to make them more COVID space and this sort of thing. And we've also got things on business planning and fundraising and marketing, how you can market your museum effectively at the moment. So keep an eye on our Hallmarks at Home programme. Also, a quick mention, lots of you will know that we have a training grants budget that this year has, uncharacteristically been very quiet on demand, but we're very happy to use that to give out grants to people who've got training costs around reopening and that sort of thing. So, do talk to us if you think we can help with that as well. But yes, and as with MD, we're always happy to hear from you, happy to support people, however we can. So do keep in touch.
Thanks, Emma.
That's great. Thank you so much. And so the last thing to say is thanks to all the delegates who we can't see, but hopefully you've enjoyed it all. And thanks so much for participating and putting so many things in the chat. It's been some really good discussion and hopefully that's been helpful. And yes, and we may see you on some upcoming sessions in the future. So thank you, everyone. And we will see you soon. Thanks, Emma. Thanks, Ian. Thanks, Joe. Bye. Bye, everybody.